I knew my neighbor was the kind of guy who believed money could erase consequences the second I saw him argue with a landscaper over the exact shade of imported palm trees. Seriously, who gets into a screaming match over Mediterranean aesthetics in suburban Ohio? But even then, I never imagined this guy would try to steal part of my property in broad daylight and somehow act like I was the unreasonable one for being upset about it. The crazy part is, if he had just asked me like a normal human being, maybe we could have worked something out. But people like Bryce Holloway don't ask, they assume. They assume their money, their confidence, and their fake smile can bulldoze through everybody around them. And for a while, it almost worked. I came home around 6:30 that evening, exhausted, covered in sawdust from work, already thinking about heating up leftovers and sitting on my back porch for 20 minutes before bed. Then I turned into my driveway and immediately saw two construction trucks parked halfway across my lawn. At first, I honestly thought somebody hit the wrong address because there were workers everywhere, concrete forms, piles of gravel, laser levels, guys carrying stone pavers like they were building a luxury hotel. But then I noticed my side garden, or what used to be my side garden, gone, completely ripped apart. My flower beds looked like somebody had dragged a grenade through them. The little brick path my daughter helped me lay down years ago, buried under tire tracks. And standing right in the middle of all that destruction was Bryce, leaning against his pearl-white Range Rover, wearing loafers with no socks like some kind of Instagram real estate guru. The man actually waved at me like we were about to discuss barbecue recipes instead of the fact his crew was actively tearing apart my property. I walked straight over there and asked, "What the hell is this?" Bryce barely even looked up from his phone. "Oh good, you're home," he said, all casual. I was going to come by later and explain everything. Explain everything. That sentence alone nearly sent my blood pressure through the roof. One of the workers kept pouring gravel while we talked, which somehow made it even more disrespectful, like Bryce had already decided this conversation was over before it started. I told him those stakes marked my property line, that his crew was at least 10 feet over onto my land, and Bryce just smiled. Not nervous, not apologetic, smug. That smug rich guy smile people do when they think they've already won before the game even starts. Then he hit me with this gem. "Actually," he said, "according to the updated survey, this section belongs to my lot. Previous records were inaccurate. Updated survey." The guy said it like he was announcing the weather. I stared at him for a second because part of me genuinely couldn't believe somebody could lie that confidently to another person's face while standing on top of destroyed property. Then Bryce shrugged and added the line that really lit the fuse. "I mean, you weren't even using this space." Man, there's something deeply insulting about another grown man deciding what you do or don't deserve to own. It wasn't about whether I used the land every day. It wasn't about flowers or grass or some fancy patio. It was the principle. My grandfather planted those hedges. My daughter painted those little garden stones. Every inch of that yard carried memories Bryce couldn't even see because all he saw was unused square footage. And Bryce? He wanted more room for his outdoor entertainment area because apparently his massive backyard still wasn't enough for the kind of parties he liked throwing every weekend. You know the type: Bluetooth jazz music, expensive whiskey, people laughing too loudly so the whole neighborhood knows they're successful. I told him he needed to stop construction immediately. He laughed. Not nervous laughter either, the kind where somebody genuinely thinks you're beneath them. Then he pointed toward a rolled-up set of papers sitting on the hood of his SUV. "Licensed surveyor signed off on everything," he said. "You can fight it with the county if you want, but this patio's getting finished." And that right there told me everything I needed to know about Bryce Holloway. This wasn't confusion. This wasn't a misunderstanding. This was a calculated power move. He assumed regular people back down when faced with expensive paperwork and aggressive confidence. Honestly, most people probably do. That night, I sat at my kitchen table rereading my property deed over and over while hearing construction equipment outside through the windows until nearly dark. Every document I had showed the same boundary line it always had. Nothing changed. Nothing moved. But somehow Bryce already had contractors pouring foundations before anybody could stop him. And the worst part? When I called the county office the next morning, the clerk sounded exhausted before I even finished explaining. She told me disputes like this could take weeks to investigate because survey conflicts required review, verification, inspections, all kinds of bureaucratic slow-motion nonsense. Meanwhile, Bryce's construction crew kept working in real time. That's when I realized something ugly about people like him. They don't win because they're smarter. They win because they know normal people get tired. Now let me pause the story for a second because this part right here, this is where a lot of people make the wrong move emotionally and end up losing before the real fight even starts. See, when somebody like Bryce comes at you with confidence, legal jargon, stamped paperwork, and a contractor crew already moving at full speed, your brain immediately starts questioning itself. Even if you know you're right, that's not an accident. This is a psychological trap wealthy, aggressive personalities use all the time. They create momentum. They move fast, act certain, and force you into defense mode while they frame themselves as the professional in the situation. From a legal perspective, property line disputes are way more serious than most people realize. According to standard procedure, no permanent structure should ever be built near a disputed boundary until verification is completed through county records, easements, utility maps, and municipal review. But guys like Bryce gamble on the fact that once construction is halfway done, most neighbors either give up or settle because they don't want years of stress, attorney fees, and HOA drama. And trust me, HOAs make situations like this even messier. A lot of homeowners think the HOA exists to protect them automatically. Not true. Most HOAs care more about paperwork consistency and liability than fairness. If someone shows up with polished documents and expensive contractors, boards often hesitate to intervene immediately because they're terrified of lawsuits. That hesitation creates a dangerous gray area where entitled people try to push boundaries, literally. But here's the important part. The law usually doesn't care who spent more money. It cares who has the actual rights. And Bryce was about to learn that lesson the hard way. At that point, I should probably admit something. For about 24 hours, Bryce actually had me doubting myself. Not legally, emotionally. There's a difference. Because when somebody walks around acting untouchable long enough, part of your brain starts wondering if maybe the system really does work differently for people with money. Every time I looked outside and saw those workers extending that giant stone patio farther into my yard, I felt sick. They moved fast too, almost strategically fast, like Bryce knew every extra hour of construction made the situation harder to reverse. By Friday afternoon, they'd already poured most of the concrete base. My old hydrangeas were gone. The cedar border my dad built 20 years ago had been ripped out and tossed into a dumpster like garbage. And Bryce? He was outside drinking sparkling water with his architect while pointing around the yard like some king planning an expansion of his kingdom. I barely slept that night. Around 2 in the morning, I ended up digging through storage boxes in my attic looking for older property paperwork because something about Bryce's updated survey felt wrong. Too clean. Too convenient. My Uncle Ray used to work for the city planning department back in the late 80s, and before he passed away, he saved everything: zoning drafts, permit maps, utility overlays, old neighborhood development plans. The man treated paperwork like buried treasure. Turns out, he was right. I found this long cardboard tube shoved behind an old filing cabinet wrapped in faded blue tape. Inside were original subdivision utility schematics for our entire block. Sewer access lines, water mains, drainage easements. Every ugly underground thing nobody thinks about until disaster hits. And right there, running directly beneath the section Bryce had stolen, was a protected municipal utility easement. I actually froze for a second staring at the map, because suddenly this wasn't just a property dispute anymore. Bryce had built a permanent structure over city infrastructure. That's nuclear level bad. And the craziest part? The easement wasn't hidden. It had been recorded for decades, which meant one of two things happened. Either Bryce never checked the utility records because he thought his money made him invincible, or somebody knowingly ignored them to speed the project through. Neither possibility was good for him. The next morning, I went full detective mode. I measured everything: distance from the original steel survey pin, edge of the patio forms, location of the destroyed landscaping, all of it. I photographed every inch of the construction site while the workers stared at me like I was some lunatic collecting evidence for a murder trial. Honestly, maybe I was. Just not the kind involving bodies. Then I scanned every easement document Uncle Ray left behind and emailed copies to the County Utilities Department, Zoning Enforcement Office, and Public Works Division. I even highlighted the exact section showing emergency sewer access beneath Bryce's new entertainment area. And then, I waited. That Monday morning, I woke up to the single most beautiful sound I've ever heard in suburban America. Not birds, not wind chimes, diesel engines. I looked outside and saw 3 county vehicles parked in front of Bryce's house, along with a zoning enforcement truck and 2 public works inspectors wearing reflective jackets. One of them was already taking photographs, while another walked the patio with a clipboard. Bryce came storming out of his house wearing golf clothes like he'd just been interrupted on his way to a country club brunch. The man looked furious. Not scared yet, just offended. That's an important difference. People like Bryce don't panic immediately because their entire identity depends on believing problems are temporary inconveniences other people solve for them. I stepped onto my porch with coffee and watched the whole thing unfold. One inspector knelt beside the patio foundation, while another compared measurements against a utility map. About 10 minutes later, I saw their body language change completely. The casual professionalism disappeared. Suddenly, they were serious. Very serious. Bryce kept talking with his hands. Fast, animated, defensive. At one point, he actually pointed toward my house, while shaking his head like I was the unreasonable one in this situation. Then the red tags came out. Man, you want to talk about satisfying? Watching a county inspector slap a bright red stop work order across the entrance to a half-finished luxury patio at 9 in the morning hits different. The construction crew shut everything down immediately. One worker literally dropped a wheelbarrow and walked back to the truck. Another guy started quietly packing tools without even making eye contact with Bryce. That told me everything. Contractors know disaster when they see it. About an hour later, Bryce marched straight across the yard toward me holding paperwork in his hand, so tightly, it looked like he wanted to rip it apart. "This was your doing?" he snapped. I took a sip of coffee before answering, because honestly, I'd earned that moment. "No," I said, "building on protected utility lines was your doing." The look on his face after that. Priceless. Not because he suddenly understood the legal problem, because for the first time, somebody had punched a hole through the illusion of control he carried around everywhere. He started ranting immediately, talking about permits, contractors, revised surveys, approved plans. But here's the thing most people don't realize. Permits don't override easements. Ever. From a legal perspective, utility easements exist specifically so cities can access critical infrastructure during emergencies. According to standard procedure, permanent structures blocking sewer or water access can trigger immediate enforcement actions because municipalities don't care how expensive your patio is if crews need to dig through it during a pipe failure. And Bryce's nightmare was just getting started. 2 days later, the county issued the official findings. Not only had his patio violated the easement, sections of his outdoor kitchen and pool decking also extended into restricted access zones. Apparently, his contractors kept expanding the design while chasing some luxury resort aesthetic without properly verifying municipal clearance boundaries. In simple terms, the entire backyard project was contaminated. Every part connected to the violation became subject to review. That's when the HOA piled on too. Funny how HOAs suddenly discover integrity once liability enters the conversation. Bryce received fines for unauthorized structural modifications, non-compliant construction, drainage interference, and failure to disclose easement conflicts during renovation approval. Watching the same HOA board that ignored my complaints suddenly act aggressive toward him felt almost comedic. But money panic changes people fast. Within a week, Bryce stopped making eye contact with neighbors. The giant confidence vanished. No more smug little laughs. No more loud parties beside the pool. His contractors disappeared completely after lawyers got involved. Half the backyard sat abandoned under plastic tarps while county notices remained taped across the property like warning labels. Then came the demolition order. And oh man, that was the real beginning of the end. Because the county didn't just require modifications. They demanded removal. Full removal. The patio had to be destroyed. Sections of the pool deck had to be jackhammered apart. The outdoor kitchen needed complete rerouting away from the easement corridor. Emergency utility access had to be restored to municipal standards before any future permits could even be reconsidered. Estimated cost? Around $350,000. I heard that number from one of the contractors talking outside and nearly dropped my rake. Bryce apparently tried fighting the county at first, but municipalities do not play games when public infrastructure is involved, especially sewer infrastructure. Nobody in local government wants their name attached to a disaster where emergency crews can't access a ruptured line because some rich guy wanted a luxury fire pit beside his imported marble countertops. A month later, demolition crews arrived. And let me tell you something darkly poetic. The same kind of machines Bryce used to erase my garden ended up tearing apart his dream backyard piece by piece. Concrete cracked. Stone pavers shattered. Dust filled the air for days. I watched workers demolish sections of that giant patio while Bryce stood near the fence looking physically sick. At one point, he noticed me outside and immediately looked away. Pride does that when reality finally lands hard enough. The neighborhood gossip spread like wildfire, too. Everybody suddenly had stories about Bryce, arguments with delivery drivers, HOA complaints, noise violations, parking issues. Turns out arrogance builds quiet resentment long before consequences arrive. And financially, he was cooked. Between demolition costs, redesign expenses, legal consultations, HOA fines, delayed permits, contractor disputes, and property value damage, the numbers spiraled out of control fast. According to one neighbor who worked in commercial lending, Bryce had leveraged a ton of debt against the property expecting the renovations to increase resale value. Instead, he created a liability nightmare. About 6 months after the inspection disaster, a for sale sign appeared in his yard. No big farewell party. No confident speeches. No fancy cars lined up outside. Just silence. The house eventually sold to a developer for far below what Bryce originally paid. And from what I heard, he lost somewhere close to $250,000 walking away from the mess. And the city? They came back one final time and installed permanent steel boundary markers between our properties. Thick, ugly, impossible to ignore metal posts hammered deep into the ground. Honestly, I love those things. Best decoration in the neighborhood. Because every time I see them, I remember something important. People like Bryce think power means taking whatever they want. But real power? Real power is knowing exactly where the line is and refusing to let anyone move it. Looking back now, the weirdest part of this whole situation isn't the money Bryce lost or the demolition or even the fact the city basically tore apart his luxury backyard with industrial equipment. It's how avoidable all of it was. Seriously, none of this had to happen. If the guy had walked over with even a tiny amount of humility and said, "Hey, I want to expand the patio, maybe we can work something out," this story probably ends with 2 neighbors drinking beer by the fence instead of county inspectors red tagging half a property. But entitlement changes people. And the lesson here is, entitlement almost always starts small before it becomes destructive. First, it's you're not using that space anyway. Then it becomes rules shouldn't apply to me. And eventually people convince themselves ownership, boundaries, and basic respect are obstacles instead of responsibilities. That mindset wrecks relationships, neighborhoods, businesses, sometimes entire lives. From a legal perspective, this story is also a reminder that paperwork matters way more than personality. Loud confidence doesn't override easements. Expensive contractors don't erase municipal records. According to standard procedure, utility access rights are treated seriously because cities plan decades ahead, long before luxury renovations and ego projects enter the picture. A lot of homeowners never even check what sits underneath their property: sewer corridors, drainage routes, access easements, electrical pathways. They just assume if they can afford to build something, they automatically have the right to. That assumption can destroy you financially. And honestly, there's another uncomfortable truth here nobody likes talking about. A lot of people weaponize exhaustion. They count on you giving up. They assume regular homeowners don't have the time, money, or emotional energy to fight back against polished documents, legal jargon, and aggressive pressure tactics. This is a psychological trap because once somebody overwhelms you emotionally, you start negotiating against your own rights just to make the stress stop. Don't do that. Document everything. Know your property lines. Keep records. And never let somebody bully you into surrendering something just because they act richer, louder, or more connected than you. Because at the end of the day, boundaries only disappear when people stop defending them. And Bryce learned that lesson in the most expensive way possible. So now I'm curious. What would you have done in my position? Would you have fought back immediately, tried to settle peacefully, or just hired a lawyer from day one? Drop your thoughts in the comments because trust me, neighborhood war stories are always crazier than people expect. And if you enjoy these real-world HOA dramas, property disputes, and revenge stories where arrogant people finally meet consequences, hit like, subscribe, and stick around. You never really know how fragile someone's dream home is until they build it on the wrong piece of land.